Vampires, haunted castles, and tyrannical villains are all elements we have associated with the Gothic literature. Today, the Gothic genre remains firmly rooted in popular culture, illustrated by the popularity of Gothic writers such as Mary Shelley and the continuing demand for horror films. But where did Gothic literature originate? The term Gothic actually traces its origin in the medieval architecture created by the Goths, a North Germanic tribe of the Middle Ages. Gothic architecture was dark, intricate, and gloomy in its appearance. Aesthetically embellished and conceptually intricate, this medieval architecture became the inspiration for a new literary genre in Europe, namely Gothicism or Gothic literature. During the 18th century, the Gothic phenomenon emerged and flourished throughout Britain, with its emphasis on suspense and the supernatural, terror and the macabre. The Gothic was heralded as a medieval revival that opposed the Enlightenment focus on reason, science, and blind faith, thus becoming a subgenre of Romanticism. Unlike Romanticism, which extolled the beauty of nature, subjectivity, individualism, and the sublime, the Gothic focused more on the darker side of humanity, human fallibility, the psychological effects of cruelty and sin, self destruction, punishment, and judgment. Author of the feminist Mary Wollstonecraft and the writer William Godwin. Mary Godwin was born on the 13th August 1797 in London. She married the writer Percy B.C. Shelley in 1816 and from an early age was surrounded by an environment conducive to the development of her literary talents. The couple met when Percy was already married. They traveled together and the night after the suicide of the first Mrs. Shelley. At the age of 18, Mary Shelley wrote the novel Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, which inspired the science fiction genre. In it, she revisited the myth of Demeter through the story of a scientist who has created a monstrous, malicious creature. Mr. and Mrs. Shelley have a great difficulty in creating a family. They lost several children before Percy Florence Shelley was born in 1819. After her husband's death in 1822, Mary devoted herself exclusively to her son and to writing. The novelist also played an important role in the dissemination of her husband's posthumous work. Suffering from a brain tumor, Mary Shelley died prematurely in London at the age of 53. The 18-year-old British author Mary Shelley published Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus anonymously. The book recounted the terrible adventure of Victor Frankenstein, who is the run from the hideous creature he gave birth to. When he reached the North Pole, he met Captain Walton and tells him his story. Through his story, the reader relives the fate of the hideous creature composed of various parts of the corpus. Abandoned and rejected, she is driven by a deep desire for revenge and commits multiple crimes. Considered a precursor to science fiction, Frankenstein already sets the limits of human science and the concerns that arise from it. Particularly gloomy evening, when the storm is raging and the little party is bored, that Lord Byron comes up with an idea for a game. A fantastic literary joke based on their collective readings of ghost stories, which were very fashionable at this time, and which had so far animated their stay. Mary was initially mortified because she could not find a subject for her story and was at disadvantage against men of letters such as Byron and Shelley. The game will run for several days. In the third edition of Frankenstein in 1831, Mary Shelley recounts the dream she had one night at the villa that helped her find her subject. The atmosphere around Lake Geneva is conducive to the gestation of this work, which some have described as a precursor to science fiction. The supernatural and mysterious elements of the novel included Frankenstein's ability to create the monster and the subsequent life the monster lives. Shelley explores human nature by making the monster seem more human than his creator. The monster is a fantastical character, and his human emotions make him a doppelganger for Frankenstein, who becomes more and more of a monster as the novel progresses. As a most Gothic literature, the hero becomes a villain in Shelley's novel. Frankenstein's thirst for knowledge and power ruins his life, as the monster first becomes a burden, and then becomes something to be feared as he seeks the scientist's revenge. Frankenstein also touched on the fall of man to expose the inner battle between good and evil. The novel's diverse settings also echo the Gothic genre with dark castles, a mysterious lab, and the icy water of the Arctic. The work is a Gothic novel and reproduces in an original way many characteristics of the genre. The emphasis on mystery and the supernatural that generate a constant expectation, suspense. Victor and his creature represent an interesting reinterpretation of the cliché of the double. Only nature, in its most sublime and at the same time terrible manifestations, like the peaks of the Alps, the stormy skies, allows to the human soul to calm down. The setting is the classic one of the genre. In fact, the monster always comes alive, appears and reappears during stormy nights, with the sky torn by lightning. The central themes of the creation and outcast of society, farewell and old text, is the overcoming of human limits of Faustian matrix. And in this perspective should be read the interesting reinterpretation of the Gothic cliché of the double. Victor Frankenstein and the monster he creates are not two characters in total opposition. Both pure in origin, they are initially polar opposites only from a cultural point of view. Frankenstein is a scientist and tries to overcome the limits of knowledge. His creator is all naturalness and primal instinct. But it is true that initially one gives life, the other death. This line of demarcation thins out as the action progresses, and Victor, who has defied God by wanting to become a creator, actually becomes slowly morally responsible for the murders of which the monster is guilty. Another theme is that the positive and the negative implication of the use of technology and science and center on fundamental question to Mary Shelley does not seem to give an answer. What are the moral implications of bringing a person back from the dead? And scientific achievement that everyone would like to achieve. Finally, there is a dichotomy between being and appearing. Too often we rely on the appearance to judge people. The monster, for example, helps a family in financial difficulty and saves a girl who is about to drown. But this is not enough to make him accept. On the contrary, he receives only beating and disgust in return for his good deeds. What do Prometheus, Faust, and Frankenstein have in common? All three defy divine power. The first created mortal by shaping them with clay and stole fire to the gods to give it to the man. The second made a pact with the devil to gain eternal youth. The last one was born in the brain of a mad scientist who created this solitary monster from scratch. All three defy the laws of nature. These three myths are deeply rooted in our collective inconscious, and there resurface with vigor in all the discourse that attempt to curb the advance of biology and genetics. Throughout history, painters, sculptors, and filmmakers have been inspired by these great figures of the Western imagination, and this is the magical representation of human heart.